The shuttle descended through the golden clouds of Nexus Prime, and Kyrith pressed all four of his hands against the viewing window like a hatchling seeing stars for the first time. Had dreamed of this moment since he was young. Since his first teacher had told him about the Galactic Academy of Species Studies, the greatest institution of learning in all the known galaxies, and now here he was, actually arriving at its doors. His scales shimmered with excitement, shifting from their usual deep blue to bright purple as his emotions overwhelmed his ability to control them. The station world spread out below him like a jewel floating in space, its surface covered with towers and domes and gardens from 1,000 different planets, all connected by bridges of light that pulsed with energy. Millions of beings from across the galaxy lived and studied here, sharing knowledge that had taken their species centuries to discover, and now Kyrith would be one of them. He was a Valorian, a member of one of the older spacefaring races, though certainly not the oldest, and his people had sent him here to learn and to bring honor to their name. His family had gathered at the spaceport on his homeworld to see him off, and his mother had touched her forehead to his in the traditional blessing, telling him to make them proud. He intended to do exactly that. The shuttle landed with barely a whisper, and Kyrith gathered his belongings and stepped out into the arrival hall, where the air smelled of 100 different atmospheres mixed together in perfect balance. Signs floated in the air, written in the universal script that all species could read, directing new students toward the registration center. Kyrith followed them through corridors filled with beings he had only ever seen in educational halls. There walked a crystallid, its body made of living gemstone that refracted light into rainbows with every step. And there floated a mindweaver, its form barely visible, more thought than flesh. A group of Thrax clicked and chittered to each other as they passed, their hard shells gleaming under the artificial lights. And Kyrith felt a thrill of wonder at the diversity of life around him. He had studied all of these species, had memorized their histories and capabilities, but seeing them in person was something else entirely. At the registration center, a tired-looking official of a species Kyrith did not recognize scanned his documents and assigned him a room in the residential Sector 7. Your roommate has already arrived, the official said in a flat voice that suggested they had said these same words thousands of times before. And orientation begins tomorrow at the 3rd hour, so do not be late. Kyrith thanked them and made his way to his new home, his forearms full of bags and his twin hearts beating fast with anticipation. The door to his room slid open to reveal a space that was small but comfortable, with 2 sleeping platforms on opposite walls and a shared study area in the center. And standing in the middle of that study area was the largest Thrax that Kyrith had ever seen. Insectoid being stood nearly 3 meters tall, with a dark red shell covered in ridges and spines, and massive mandibles that could probably cut through metal. Kyrith froze in the doorway, suddenly very aware of how soft and vulnerable his own body was compared to this armored giant. But then the Thrax made a sound that Kyrith's translator rendered as friendly laughter, and its antennae waved in a gesture of welcome. You must be my new roommate, the Thrax said, its voice a deep rumble that Kyrith felt in his chest. And I am Churik of the Northern Hive, here to study military history and tactical theory. So please do not be alarmed by my appearance, because I promise I only eat plants. Kyrith let out a breath he had not realized he was holding and stepped into the room, setting his bags down on the empty sleeping platform. I am Kyrith of the Valorian Third Circle, he replied, and I am here to study xenobiology and galactic history. So I think we will have much to discuss. Churik clicked his mandibles in approval. And just like that, Kyrith had made his first friend at the academy over the following days. They settled into a routine, attending classes together when their schedules aligned and sharing meals in the great cafeteria. where food from every corner of the galaxy was available. It was during one of these meals that Chirrut first mentioned. "Rumor, have you ever heard of the Apex Index?" the Thrax asked. Keeping his voice low even though no one was sitting near them, Chirrut looked up from his meal, curious at his friend's secretive tone. "I have not," he admitted. "So what is it?" Chirrut leaned closer, his antennae twitching with nervous energy. "They say that somewhere in the Academy archives, there is a list, a ranking of every known spacefaring species based on how dangerous they are. And the Council of Elders created it 300 years ago, but then classified it because the results caused too much trouble." Chirrut felt his scales shift to a skeptical gray. "That sounds like a story told to frighten new students," he said. "And I am sure every species thinks they would be at the top of such a list." Chirrut's mandibles clicked in what might have been agreement. That is true. And everyone does think their species is the most dangerous. But the strange thing is that no one who has actually seen the list ever talks about what they found. And some say they look different afterward, changed somehow. Like they learned something they cannot forget. Chirrut considered this, his scientific mind intrigued despite his doubts. If such a list exists, what criteria would it use? He wondered aloud, because there are so many ways to measure danger. And a species that is powerful in one way might be weak in another. Chirrut shrugged, a gesture he had learned from watching other species. "I do not know. But they say the algorithm measures everything. Biology and psychology and history and potential. And then combines it all into a single ranking that cannot be argued with." Chirrut found himself thinking about the Apex Index long after their conversation ended. Lying awake on his sleeping platform, while Chirrut's breathing settled into the slow rhythm of sleep, surely his own people, the Valorians, would rank highly on such a list, because they had mastered gravitational manipulation and could crush enemies with the power of collapsing stars, or perhaps the Thrax would be near the top. With their hive mind coordination and natural armor and overwhelming numbers, or the Crystallids, ancient beings who had existed before most stars were born and who could not be killed by any weapon known to science. The more he thought about it, the more he wanted to know the truth, and so began his obsession with finding the Apex Index. An obsession that would change everything he thought he knew about the galaxy and his place within. I did not know it yet. But he was about to discover that the universe was far stranger and far more terrifying than any of his teachers had ever told him. And at the center of that terror was a species he had never even heard of. A species that the rest of the galaxy whispered about in fear and fascination. But that discovery was still months away, hidden in classified files and guarded secrets, waiting for him to uncover it. For now, Chirrut was just a young scholar with a curious mind and a dangerous question: what species truly stood at the top of the galactic food chain? The answer would haunt him forever. 3 months passed at the academy, and Chirrut became two people living in one body. By day he was the perfect student, attending every lecture and completing every assignment and earning praise from his professors for his sharp mind and dedication to learning. But by night he became something else entirely. A hunter of secrets, spending hours in the archives searching for any trace of the Apex Index. His obsession grew with every dead end he encountered, because the more he searched, the more evidence he found that the list was real. He started small, asking casual questions to his professors about species rankings and threat assessments. But their reactions told him more than their words ever could. Some laughed and dismissed the idea as nonsense, but their laughter was too quick and too loud. Like they were trying to convince themselves as much as him. Others went silent and changed the subject with obvious discomfort, refusing to meet his eyes. And one professor, an elderly Valorian who taught advanced xenobiology, simply said, "Stop looking," and walked away before Chirrut could ask anything else. That warning only made him more determined. bribed an archivist with rare crystals from his homeworld, and gained access to restricted sections of the Academy database. Spending long nights reading through classified reports and ancient records, he found fragments and hints, pieces of a puzzle that refused to come together. There were references to something called the Young assessment project that had been conducted 300 years ago by a council of the 12 most advanced civilizations. There were budget reports showing massive funding for a research initiative that had no official name or purpose. There were personnel files for scientists who had worked on a classified project and then disappeared from public records entirely. And there were censored documents, so many censored documents, with entire sections blacked out and replaced with warnings about unauthorized access. But nowhere could he find the actual list, the Apex Index itself, and his frustration grew with each passing week. Chirrut watched his roommate's obsession with growing concern, often finding Kyrvith still awake at dawn with bloodshot eyes and scales that had turned the pale gray of exhaustion. "You need to rest," the Thrax would say, but Kyrvith would just wave him away and continue his search. It was during this time that Kyrvith first noticed the human. He was sitting in the cafeteria one evening, too tired to search and too restless to sleep. When he saw her sitting alone at a table in the corner, she was small, smaller than most of the beings in the room, with soft brown skin and dark hair pulled back from her face. And she was eating something that steamed with heat while reading from a datapod. What struck Kyrvith was not her appearance, but the space around her. The cafeteria was crowded that night, with students from dozens of species packed together at long tables. But the tables nearest to the human were empty, as if an invisible barrier surrounded her. Other students walked past her table and then quickly looked away, finding seats on the far side of the room, even when closer seats were available. Kyrvith had never seen anything like it. Turned to Chirrut, who had joined him for dinner, and pointed with one of his lower arms. "Who is that?" he asked. "And why does everyone avoid her?" Chirrut's antennae flattened against his head, an expression Kyrvith had never seen before. Something between fear and respect, and something else he could not name. "That is a human," Chirrut said quietly. "And her name is Elena Vasquez, or at least that is what the other students call her. And she arrived at the academy last year from a planet called Earth." Kyrvith searched his memory, but found nothing. "I've never heard of humans or Earth," he admitted. "So are they a new species to the galactic community?" Chirrut nodded slowly. "Very new, because they have only been traveling between stars for about 200 years, which is nothing compared to most of the species here. And yet somehow they have already established colonies in dozens of systems and formed alliances with races that have existed for millennia." Kyrvith studied the human with renewed interest, noting the way she held her eating utensil, the way her eyes moved across the datapad, the way she seemed completely unaware of or unbothered by the empty space around her. If they are so new and so few, why does everyone keep their distance? He asked, because usually the established species look down on newcomers, not avoid them. Chirrut was quiet for a long moment, his mandibles clicking softly as he considered his answer. "There are rumors," he finally said. "Stories that the older students tell, and I do not know if they are true. But they say that humans are different from other species, that they come from a world that should have killed them, that they do things no other species would consider possible." "What kind of things?" Chirrut shook his head, his antennae still flat with unease. "I do not want to talk about it. And you should not ask too many questions about humans, because some knowledge is dangerous." But Kyrvith was already thinking, already connecting dots in his mind. A new species that made older races nervous, a classified ranking system that caused political instability, professors who refused to discuss certain topics. What if these things were connected? He began to research humans alongside his search for the Apex Index. But he found surprisingly little information. The official records described them as a young species from a mid-sized planet in an unremarkable solar system, with average intelligence and below-average physical capabilities, and nothing special about their biology, and yet the unofficial sources painted a very different picture. A crystalid merchant he interviewed shuddered when Kervith mentioned humans, saying only that his people had learned never to make deals with them because they always found a way to win. A Thrax soldier in the Academy's security force admitted that human combat tactics were studied in the advanced classes, but never taught to humans themselves, because the instructors were afraid of what they might do with the knowledge. And an elderly professor of ancient history let slip that humans had been contacted by the Galactic community much earlier than their official records claimed. But the first contact mission had failed spectacularly, and all records of what happened had been classified at the highest level. Every answer led to more questions, and every question led to more mystery. Who were these humans really? Why did a species that had existed for such a short time make everyone so nervous? And where did they rank on the Apex Index that Kervith was still desperately trying to find? One night, unable to sleep, Kervith returned to the cafeteria for a warm drink, and he found Elena Vasquez there again, sitting alone at the same table, reading the same datapad. She looked up as he passed, and their eyes met for just a moment. She smiled at him, a strange expression that showed her teeth. And something about that smile made Kervith's scales shift to a color he did not recognize. A color that was neither fear nor curiosity, but something in between. He nodded politely and hurried past, but he could feel her eyes on his back as he walked away. He did not know it yet, but that smile would stay with him, appearing in his dreams and his thoughts at unexpected moments. There was something about that human, something that made him feel like prey in the presence of a predator. Even though she had done nothing threatening at all, he needed to find that list. He needed to understand, and he was getting closer, closer than he knew, because in just a few more weeks, he would finally discover the truth about the Apex Index and about humanity, and about why the galaxy was so very, very afraid. The breakthrough came on a night like any other, when Kervith was so tired that his forehands trembled and his scales had turned the dull gray of complete exhaustion. He had been searching for 6 months now, spending every free moment hunting through the Academy's vast digital archives, and he had begun to wonder if the Apex Index was nothing more than a legend after all. But then he found it was exploring a forgotten corner of the quantum database, a section that had not been accessed in over 200 years according to the system logs. When he noticed something strange, there was a gap in the file structure, a space where data should exist but appeared to be empty, like a missing tooth in an otherwise perfect smile. Kervith had seen gaps like this before, and they usually meant that someone had deleted files long ago and hoped no one would notice. But he had learned many tricks during his months of searching, and he knew that deleted data was never truly gone, just hidden beneath layers of newer information. He worked through the night, using techniques he had learned from a Mindweaver hacker he had befriended, peeling back layer after layer of digital protection until finally, just as the artificial sun began to brighten outside his window, he found what he was looking for: a single file, buried so deep that it had survived every purge and every cleanup for 300 years. The Apex Index's twin hearts pounded so hard he could hear them in his ears as he opened the file and watched it load, line by line, into his personal display. The document began with an introduction explaining its purpose. This index represents the combined assessment of the 12 founding species of the Galactic Council, ranking all known spacefaring civilizations according to their threat potential, survival capabilities, and danger rating based on the following criteria: Then came the list of factors: biological adaptability, measuring how well a species could survive in different environments; environmental tolerance, measuring the range of conditions a species could endure; combat effectiveness, measuring raw fighting ability both individually and in group; strategic intelligence, measuring the ability to plan and execute complex operations; persistence quotient, measuring the likelihood that a species would continue pursuing a goal despite obstacles; and finally, something called survival deviation factor, a metric that measured how often a species survives situations that they statistically should not have survived. Kirveth scrolled down to the actual rankings, his hands shaking with anticipation. The list was long, containing 4,127 spacefaring species, arranged from least dangerous to most dangerous. And Kirveth decided to start from the bottom and work his way up. The lowest ranked species were ones he had never heard of. Small civilizations that had barely left their home systems and posed no threat to anyone. He scrolled faster, passing through the middle ranks where most species lived, neither particularly dangerous nor particularly harmless. Then he began to recognize names. The Valorians appeared at rank 23, and Kirveth felt a flush of pride mixed with disappointment, because he had hoped his people would be higher, but 23 out of over 4,000 was still respectable. The Crystallids were at rank 41, which surprised him because they were ancient and powerful. But the notes beside their entry explained that their inability to reproduce quickly and their dependence on specific mineral environments limited their threat potential. The Thrax were at rank 84, held back by their need for hive coordination and their vulnerability to certain frequencies of sound that disrupted their communication. Kept scrolling, watching the numbers get smaller as the danger ratings got higher. Rank 15. The Silicoid Collective, beings of living metal who could survive in vacuum. Rank 12. The Dominar Warlords, a species that had evolved specifically for combat and conquest. Rank 7. The Mindweavers, psychic entities that could control the thoughts of other beings. Rank 5. The Vex Swarm, a species that existed as a single distributed consciousness across millions of identical bodies. Rank 3. The Etherborn, immortal beings made of pure energy who had existed since the first stars ignited. Rank 2. The Kreth Collective, a species so dangerous that the entire galactic community had agreed to quarantine them to their home system, surrounding it with weapons platforms that would destroy anything trying to leave. Kirveth paused before scrolling to rank 1. He tried to guess what species could possibly be more dangerous than immortal energy beings or quarantined monsters, perhaps an artificial intelligence that had evolved beyond organic control. Perhaps an ancient species from before the current universe, survivors of a previous cosmic cycle? He scrolled up to see rank 1 and his mind went completely blank. Aran K. 1. Human, Homo sapiens. Sol Syathian stared at the words, certain that he was misreading them. Human, the small soft creatures from the unremarkable planet called Earth. They, species that had only been spacefaring for 200 years, the same species as Elena Vasquez, the quiet girl who sat alone in the cafeteria and smiled with her teeth. They were ranked above the Etherborn, who could not be killed. They were ranked above the Kreth, who were so dangerous they had been imprisoned in their own solar system. They were ranked first, at the very top, the most dangerous species in the known galaxy. Kirveth refreshed the document 3 times, certain there was an error, but the ranking did not change. He checked the methodology, the data sources, the algorithms used to calculate the scores, but everything appeared to be legitimate, according to the most comprehensive threat assessment ever conducted by the greatest minds of 12 advanced civilizations. Humans were the apex predators of the galaxy. But how could that be possible? Kirveth pulled up the detailed notes attached to the human entry. Desperate to understand, the notes were extensive, far longer than any other species entry, and they were written in a tone that Kyrveth could only describe as frightened. Subject species displays an unprecedented combination of threat factors. The first note read, with no single weakness that can be reliably exploited. Recommend extreme caution in all interactions. Another note warned, as subject species has demonstrated ability to form bonds with individuals of other species, while simultaneously maintaining species-level competitive aggression. Assessment team unanimously agrees that subject species represents existential threat potential, a final note concluded, and recommends limiting subject species access to advanced technology until further study can be conducted. But this assessment had been made 300 years ago, and clearly those recommendations had been ignored. Because humans now had access to everything the galactic community had to offer, Kyrveth sat back from his display, his mind racing with questions. Why had the Council classified this document? Why had they allowed humans to join the galactic community despite these warnings? And what was it about humans that made them more dangerous than immortals and hive minds and living weapons? He needed answers, and he knew exactly who to ask. There was one professor at the academy who had been alive when the Apex Index was created. One being who might be willing to explain what he had found. Professor Zalith, the ancient mindweaver who taught theoretical xenopsychology, had been part of the original assessment team, and tomorrow Kyrveth was going to demand the truth. He saved a copy of the Apex Index to his personal storage, encrypted it with every protection he knew, and finally allowed himself to collapse onto his sleeping platform. But sleep did not come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elena Vasquez smiling at him with those small blunt teeth, and he wondered what horrors lay hidden behind that seemingly harmless expression. The most dangerous species in the galaxy had been sitting in the cafeteria eating dinner while everyone around her pretended not to notice, and Kyrveth had walked right past her. Never knowing how close to death he might have been, tomorrow he would learn the truth, and nothing would ever be the same again. Professor Zalith's office was located in the oldest part of the academy, in a tower that had been built before most of the current species had achieved spaceflight. Kyrveth walked through corridors that hummed with ancient energy, past doors that led to rooms no student had entered in centuries, until he reached a simple entrance marked with symbols in a language that predated the universal script. He pressed the entry request, and after a long moment, the door slid open. The office inside was dark, lit only by floating crystals that pulsed with soft purple light, and the air smelled of something old and strange, like memories given physical form. Professor Zalith waited at the center of the room, her form barely visible, more presence than body, her psychic energy filling the space like water filling a glass. I wondered when you would come, she said, and her voice echoed not in the air but directly in Kyrveth's mind. Because I have been watching your search for some time now, young Valorian. Kyrveth's scales flushed with surprise and embarrassment. You knew I was looking for the Apex Index? I am a mindweaver, she replied with what might have been amusement. And your obsession has been broadcasting across the psychic spectrum for months, so loud that even the non-telepathic species could probably sense it. Kyrveth straightened all four of his shoulders, deciding that honesty was his only option. I found it, he said, and I read it. And I need to understand why humans are ranked first. The floating crystals flickered, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. You saw the human entry? I saw it, but I do not understand it, because they are small and soft and new to space. And yet, your assessment ranked them above immortals and hive minds and species that have been conquering worlds since before my son was born. Professor Zalith was silent for a long time, her formless body rippling with thoughts that Kyrveth could not read. Finally, she spoke. I helped create that assessment 300 years ago. And I have regretted it every day since, not because we were wrong, but because we were right. She gestured, and a holographic display appeared between them, showing images and data that Kyrvith had never seen before. Let me tell you about humans, young scholar. And may the ancient ones forgive me for what I am about to share. The display shifted to show a blue and green planet orbiting a yellow star. This is Earth, the human homeworld. And the first thing you must understand is that this planet is trying to kill them. Has been trying to kill them since the moment they evolved. And yet they refuse to die. What do you mean? Kyrvith asked. Earth is classified as a Category 4 death world, which means it is among the most hostile environments where intelligent life has ever developed. And the conditions there would kill most species within days. The display showed images that made Kyrvith's scales turn white with massive storms of spinning wind that could destroy entire cities, mountains that spewed liquid rock and toxic gases into the atmosphere, ground that split apart and shook, collapsing buildings and swallowing people whole, waves of water taller than ships that swept across coastlines in something called seasons, a phenomenon where the planet's tilted rotation caused dramatic temperature shifts throughout the year, from frozen ice to burning heat, forcing all life to constantly adapt or die. Humans survived all of this, Professor Zalith continued, not by hiding from it or avoiding it, but by learning to thrive within it. And that survival shaped them into something unique. The display changed to show early humans, small figures moving across a vast grassland, chasing a large animal. They evolved as persistence predators, which is a hunting style so rare that we have only seen it in 3 other species across the entire galaxy. And those other 3 are all extinct now. What is a persistence predator? It means they do not need to be faster than their prey, or stronger than their prey, or smarter than their prey, because they simply follow it until it collapses from exhaustion, running it down over hours or days until it cannot run anymore. Kyrvith felt cold despite the warmth of his scales. They hunt by refusing to stop? Exactly. And this psychology has shaped everything about them. Because once a human decides to pursue something, whether it is prey or a goal or an enemy, they do not give up. They do not get tired. They simply keep coming until they succeed or until they die. And even death is not always enough to stop them, because other humans will take up the pursuit. The display showed images of human history, wars and disasters and catastrophes. And in every image, humans kept going, kept building, kept fighting, kept surviving against odds that should have destroyed them. Their bodies are equally terrifying. Professor Zalith continued, because they can function across a temperature range that would kill most species. And they can survive for weeks without food and days without water. And they heal from injuries that would be fatal to others. She showed medical records from the first contact mission, images of humans who had broken bones that knitted back together, who had lost limbs and continued fighting, who had been poisoned and burned and crushed and still refused to die. They are made of water and soft tissue and fragile bones. And yet they are nearly impossible to kill permanently, because their bodies simply refuse to accept death as an option. Kyrvith thought of Elena Vasquez, small and soft and harmless looking, and tried to imagine her surviving the things shown in these images. But the most dangerous thing about humans, Professor Zalith said, her psychic voice dropping to a whisper, is not their persistence or their durability, but their ability to form bonds. Bonds? They call it pack bonding, and it means they can form intense emotional attachments to almost anything. Other humans, other species, animals, places, ideas, even objects. And once they have bonded with something, they will protect it with their lives. The display showed humans with other species, working together, fighting together, living together. This makes them incredibly loyal allies. but it also makes them incredibly dangerous enemies. Because if you threaten something a human has bonded with, they will not rest until they have destroyed you. And they will use every tool at their disposal to do so. What kind of tools? Professor Zealous' form flickered with what Kyrvith recognized as fear. Even in an ancient being who had lived for millennia, humans are generalists in violence, which means they do not specialize in one form of combat like most species, but instead master all forms simultaneously, and they innovate constantly, creating new weapons faster than any civilization can adapt to defend against them. She showed images of human weapons, from simple clubs and sharpened stones to devices that split atoms and unleashed the power of stars. They invented nuclear weapons within decades of achieving powered flight, devices capable of destroying entire cities in an instant. And then they used these weapons on themselves, twice. And then they built more of them. Kyrith's scales turned colors he did not even have names for. They used world-ending weapons on their own people? Yes, and they survived, and they learned from the experience. And they became even more dangerous, because now they knew exactly what their weapons could do. Professor Zealous' form expanded, filling the room with her psychic presence. The apex index measures one thing above all others, young Valorian. And that is the answer to a simple question. What happens when this species decides something must die? She paused, letting the words sink in. For most species, the answer involves limitations. Things they will not do, lines they will not cross, tactics they will not use. But for humans, the answer is simple and terrifying. What is the answer? Everything. They will do everything. They will sacrifice anything. They will pay any price. And they will not stop until their enemy is utterly destroyed. And even then, they will not rest. Because they will hunt down anyone who might pose a threat in the future, and anyone who helped their enemy, and anyone who might think of becoming their enemy someday. The display showed the final statistic from the human entry, the one that had earned them the top rank. Humans have never lost a war of extinction, Professor Zalith said, not once in their entire history. Not against other humans, not against other species, not against their own planet's attempts to kill them. Never. She looked at Kyrvith with senses that went deeper than vision. That is why they are ranked first. Because when you calculate the probability that a species will survive any given conflict and emerge victorious, humans break the mathematics. They survive when they should die. They win when they should lose. And they do things that no other species would even consider possible. Kyrith stood in silence, his entire understanding of the galaxy reshaping itself around this new knowledge. Why was this classified? He finally asked, and why was humanity allowed to join the galactic community despite these warnings? Professor Zalith's form flickered with something that might have been sadness. It was classified because we were afraid. Afraid of what might happen if other species learned the truth and decided to destroy humanity before they became too powerful. Because we knew that such an attack would fail, and that the survivors would remember, and that the galaxy would face a threat unlike any it had ever known. She moved toward the door, signaling that their meeting was ending. We allowed them to join because we had no choice. Because they were coming whether we welcomed them or not. And we decided it was better to make them allies than enemies. Kyrvith walked through the academy in a daze, seeing everything differently now, as if his eyes had been replaced with new ones that perceived truths he had been blind to before. Corridors that had once seemed crowded now revealed their hidden patterns. The way traffic flowed around certain points, the way beings unconsciously adjusted their paths. And he noticed for the first time that there was always a clear space, a bubble of emptiness. Around the handful of humans who studied here, he saw a human walking toward him. A tall male with yellow hair and pale skin, and he watched as a group of Thrax soldiers moved aside to let the human pass. Not out of courtesy, but out of something deeper. Something instinctual the human did not seem to notice, or perhaps he was used to it, because his stride never changed, and his expression remained neutral. But Kirvith saw the way the Thrax's antennae pressed flat against their heads until the human was gone. He thought about what Professor Zalith had told him, about persistence and pack bonding and creative violence. And he wondered how many of the beings around him knew the truth. Some of them must know. He realized the older ones, especially. The professors and administrators who had lived long enough to see humans rise from a single planet to a galactic presence in just 2 centuries. They knew what humans were capable of, and they kept that knowledge to themselves, letting younger species like the Valorians and Thrax believe that humans were nothing special. Just another newcomer to the cosmic stage. But why? The answer came to him as he walked, forming slowly in his mind like a picture emerging from fog. They stayed silent because they were afraid, not just of humans, but of what might happen if everyone knew the truth. If every species in the galaxy suddenly understood that the small, soft mammals from Earth were the most dangerous beings ever assessed, there would be panic. There would be calls for action. There would be species who decided to strike first before the humans became too powerful, and that would be the worst possible outcome. Because the one thing that might doom the galaxy was making enemies of a species that had never lost a war of extinction. Better to let humans integrate slowly, to let them form bonds and make friends and become part of the galactic community, to give them reasons to protect the galaxy rather than conquer it. It was not a comfortable strategy, but it was probably the only one that had any chance of working. Kirov found himself standing outside the cafeteria, and he realized that his feet had carried him here without his conscious decision. As if his body knew what his mind had not yet accepted. He needed to see her again. He needed to see Elena Vasquez. He walked inside and immediately spotted her at her usual table in the corner, sitting alone as always, a cup of something steaming in front of her and a datapad in her hands. She looked up as he entered, and their eyes met across the crowded room. And she smiled. That strange tooth-showing smile that he now understood was both a greeting and a relic of her species. Predator past his scales shifted to a color he had never seen them turn before. Something between fear and fascination and a strange warm feeling he could not name. He thought about walking away, about returning to his room and his research and his safe, comfortable ignorance, about pretending he had never learned the truth about humanity. But then he remembered something else. Professor Zalith had said, if a human offers you friendship, accept it, because a human's loyalty is the most valuable thing in the galaxy. Elena was still smiling at him, and now she raised one hand in a small wave, a gesture of greeting that was universal across most species. She was offering him friendship. The most dangerous being in the galaxy was offering him a place in her. Pakireth took a deep breath with all 4 of his lungs, and he walked toward her table. Every step felt like he was walking toward the edge of a cliff, toward a point of no return, and in a way he supposed he was, because he knew that once he sat down at that table, his life would never be the same. He reached her and stood there for a moment, not knowing what to say, his 4 hands fidgeting with nervous energy. Elena looked up at him with eyes that seemed friendly and warm, and not at all like the eyes of a persistence predator who could hunt prey across continents until it collapsed from exhaustion. "Hey," she said, and her voice was soft and pleasant and carried no hint of the terrors her species could unleash. "You are Karvith, right? I have seen you around." He nodded, suddenly aware of how dry his throat had become. "I am," he managed to say. "And you are Elena Vasquez." She grinned, showing more of those blunt teeth, and gestured at the empty seat across from her. "Want to sit down? Because I have been eating alone for months, and I could really use some company." This was the moment. The choice that would define everything that came after Kiva thought about the Apex Index, about the classification of Earth as a death world, about humans using nuclear weapons on themselves, about persistent predators who never stopped hunting, and then he thought about something else. Something Professor Zaleth had mentioned almost as an afterthought: humans would protect the things they bonded with, would fight for them, would die for them, would unleash all of their terrible creative violence on anyone who threatened them. If he became Elena's friend, if he became part of her pack, then the most dangerous species in the galaxy would consider him worth protecting, and perhaps that was the real reason the Council had allowed humans into the galactic community. Not because they feared what humans would do as enemies, but because they hoped to benefit from what humans would do as friends. Skirvith sat down. "I am glad to meet you properly," he said, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears, steadier than he felt. "Because I think we have a lot to learn from each other." Elena's smile widened, and there was genuine warmth in her expression. A warmth that Skirvith was surprised to find he believed was real. "I think so too," she said. "And I have to warn you that I am really curious about your species, because Valorians are fascinating. So I hope you do not mind answering a lot of questions." Skirvith felt something loosen in his chest, some tension he had not realized he was carrying. "I do not mind at all," he said. "As long as you answer my questions too." She laughed, a sound that was surprisingly musical, and pushed her cup toward him. "Want some coffee?" "Because I made the cafeteria imported from Earth, and it is amazing. Though I should warn you, it might be too hot for Yaukiev." Looked at the steaming liquid, remembering that humans consumed beverages at temperatures that would scald most other species, and he politely declined. They talked for hours, about their homeworlds and their families and their studies and their dreams. And Skirvith found himself forgetting, for long stretches of time, that he was sitting across from the most dangerous being in the known galaxy. Elena was funny and curious and kind, quick to laugh and quick to ask questions, and genuinely interested in everything Skirvith had to say. She told him about Earth, about the mountains and oceans and forests and deserts, about the billions of humans who lived there and the millions who had spread to other worlds, about the food and music and art that her species had created. And Skirvith told her about his homeworld, about the crystal caves and the gravitational temples and the ancient traditions of his people. And she listened with rapt attention, asking questions that showed she truly wanted to understand. By the time they finally said goodnight and went their separate ways, Skirvith realized that he had made a friend, a real friend. He walked back to his room with his scales shimmering in colors he had never seen before, bright and warm, and somehow Canton Chirik was waiting for him when he arrived. And his roommate's antennae twitched with concern. "I saw you in the cafeteria," the Thrax said, "talking to the human for hours, and I was worried." "Because you know what they say about humans," Skirvith smiled, surprising himself with how easily it came. "I know exactly what they say about humans," he replied, "probably better than anyone else at this academy. And that is why I know I made the right choice." Chirik looked confused, his mandibles clicking with uncertainty. "What do you mean?" Skirvith thought about the Apex Index, about Professor Zaleth's warnings, about the terrible, beautiful truth of what humans really were. And then he thought about Elena's laugh, about her curiosity, about the way she had looked genuinely happy to have someone to talk to. "I mean that the most dangerous species in the galaxy just invited me to be her friend," he said, "and I would be a fool to refuse." He lay down on his sleeping platform and closed his eyes. And for the first time in months, he slept without dreaming of secrets and fears. Tomorrow he would see Elena again, and they would talk and laugh and learn from each other. And maybe, just maybe, he would become the kind of friend that a human would protect with all of their terrifying loyalty. It was a strange feeling, knowing that you had befriended an apex predator, but it was also, Skirvith decided, a very good feeling, and somewhere across the academy, in a small room decorated with pictures of a blue and green planet, Elena Vasquez smiled to herself as she thought about her new friend with the shimmering scales. She did not know why other species avoided her, did not understand the fear she saw in their eyes. Had spent her first year at the academy, wondering if she had done something wrong, but today, a Valorian had sat down across from her and talked to her like she was just a person, not something to be feared, and that, she thought, was the beginning of something wonderful.